let's talk about integrated into therapy. Okay, so this is something that is part of the work that you do. How do you recommend it to clients? And how do you talk about its value for them personally? Are there people that you would not recommend it for? Like, is there any kind of screening process that might take place? And what happens after the therapy session is done? Are there certain interventions that are used to try to, I guess, for the lack of a better word, like consolidate learning, maybe that has taken place?
Yeah, good question. So when somebody reaches out to our practice and says, hey, I heard you guys work with microdosing, I think I'd like to do that. My question to them first is always, have you had any experience with psilocybin in the past? And what, if so, what has that experience been like for you? And then if you have not, what have you heard? And what do you think this is going to do for you? Because humans are intelligent. We always have an outcome that we're seeking when we're trying something new. And within that, I want to make sure that the expectation is something that's realistic for them. So that's where a lot of the conversation then will go to kind of what we're talking about today. Well, I haven't really heard much about it. I've just heard it can be helpful. All right, well, what have you heard it can be helpful for? Well, sometimes I get really anxious. I have a hard time quieting my brain down, or I get really depressed and I end up isolating, or it impacts relationships. So we'll talk about those things specifically. All right, here's how it can potentially work to help you. But really, it's always the same. Really, it's always going back to these key areas of the brain that are being impacted, such as reducing blood flow to the amygdala so we're not in fight or flight and fear, stimulating the prefrontal cortex, more focus, more creativity, more forward thinking, more goal oriented and planning, quieting the default mode network, that whole aspect in between, which I know if there are neuroscientists listening to this, please do not email me. I understand these are all part of the default mode network, but just for ease of conversation, we look at that area specifically, again, going back to those belief systems. Where does anxiety come from? Where does depression come from? These are all thoughts about how we're experiencing the world. Well, I should be doing this, or I ought to be doing that, or I should not be doing this or that. Then why are those things happening? So when somebody wants to understand microdosing for themselves, it really is, let's talk about what's happening in the brain and how are those things going to impact your daily life. But also, I do not say, well, if you take a mushroom, everything will be fine, because that's also not how it works. This is not just a substance that you add to the body and then therefore everything is fixed and better. There is work that goes along with that, and that's really the therapeutic component. So when it comes to microdosing, it's not exactly the same as macro, where you take your dose and you sit with a therapist at the same time, or a clinician at the same time, to walk through that experience. Microdosing is something that's being done every day. Your therapy might be once a week, might be once a month, really depends on the individual. But what our clinic has done is we have a weekly microdosing therapy group. It is led by a therapist. We talk about dosage. We talk about what are you noticing? People ask questions. And there's always discussion on how is your perspective shifting. So if we are enhancing neuroplasticity and we're quieting down all of these inner, tightly held, rigid belief systems, what new information are we putting in there? And the new information doesn't have to come from a book or an educator of this is what you should think. That's not it. The new information is, how is your thinking about yourself and your experiences shifting? What are you noticing? Oh, I'm noticing I'm more connected to nature. Okay, that makes a lot of sense. We are connected. Just we make ourselves very separate from it in the way that we live our lives. Oh, I'm noticing that when people turn on their blinker on the interstate, I'm more inclined to let them in. Okay, good. You have an awareness of other people. We're not in this tight egocentric box anymore. So I go through and describe really that's some of the things you can be looking for. Microdosing, how it's showing up in your everyday life, is not about what do you feel. It's what do you notice? And that's how we measure really where those changes are happening. So the therapeutic component is paying attention to how things are changing or shifting in your awareness, and what do you do with that information? Do you do what I tried to do in a larger dose experience that I did for myself? And that is have a full on argument with myself about this is not where I wanted my brain to go. And I wanted to think about this and not that. And be willing to say, okay, Charity, just this is the experience itself. Let go of it. And I took away something that was very meaningful from it. And that was with 3/4 of a gram, 0.75. So again, I know I'm straying just slightly from that, but to touch on this shift between a microdose and a macro experience, there's a whole space in between that can be incredibly helpful and very therapeutic once you have started microdosing and deal with what I call the floating variables. The irritations over here and the things about your relationship and people at work and the negative self-talk, start to quiet some of that down. And then you can get to some more of those root issues of where did that stuff even come from? And that can be done all by yourself at home, no shaman, no therapist, no anything else, just your own shift in awareness.